A few years ago, spiritual abuse was not a common term. When I first heard it, though, it struck a nerve. If you were raised in a coercive religious household, have been in a relationship with a narcissist who attempted to use religion to control you, or have been a member of a toxic high demand group, sometimes referred to as a cult, you have experienced spiritual abuse. Any attempt to exert power and control over someone using religion, faith, or beliefs can be spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse can happen within a religious organization or in a personal relationship. Spiritual abuse is not limited to one religion, denomination, or group of people. It can happen in any religious group and or as an element of child abuse, elder abuse, or domestic violence. Narcissist routinely abuses their romantic partner. The dynamics can be very similar to what happens within these high demand groups, but on a micro scale. In fact, some experts refer to these types of relationships as a cult of one, because the narcissistic cult leader has only one follower. Abuse is a pattern in which one individual, whether an intimate partner or person with authority, uses fear, intimidation, violence, or other harm to control another. Abuse can cause serious trauma and have a significant impact on your mental health. It's important to remember that abuse is never deserved. Sexually abusive tactics are found both in large, well-recognized faith organizations and in cults. Often leaders of pseudo-religious groups will use spirituality as a way to exert control over followers. This can have serious consequences for adults and children. Narcissists seek to gain egoic supply from their prey, and they are aware that by putting themselves in a position of spiritual authority, they can easily disguise who they really are. Working to gain the trust of vulnerable people with their often vast religious or spiritual knowledge, along with gaining empathy and support, they can be very alluring, charismatic, and extremely convincing. Religion and spirituality should be a source of comfort, peace, community, and inspiration in your life. If that is not the case, you could be experiencing spiritual abuse. Some signs of spiritual abuse within an organization include intimidation into conformity, insulting other belief systems, censorship from asking questions or disagreeing with the organization or leader, feeling isolated or rejected by your spiritual community, public shaming or humiliation, threat of spiritual consequences for not conforming. One example of control and religious abuse is with purity culture, where female modesty and abstinence are revered as the gold standard and are required behaviors for full participation in the community. Purity culture and similar issues, such as disclosing same-sex attraction or enduring domestic violence under the guise of following spiritual demands, are all forms of spiritual abuse. Continued spiritual abuse can lead to the development of religious trauma syndrome. Religious trauma syndrome is a phrase coined by Dr. Marlene Winnell, an expert on religious trauma and spiritual abuse. I highly recommend her book, Leaving the Fold, if you or someone you love is attempting to recover from this kind of trauma. Spiritual abuse is no less harmful or difficult to endure than any other kind of abuse, as a person's spiritual life is deeply personal. However, this kind of abuse can be very difficult to identify, as many victims may not recognize it as mistreatment. Spiritual abuse doesn't have to be perpetrated by a religious leader. It can also be a facet of domestic violence and child abuse. These types of abuse encompass much more than physical violence, hitting, kicking, and slapping. They also have many psychological and emotional elements that cause a great deal of harm and distress. When it comes to religious abuse in a parent-child relationship, warning signs will be similar to those in typical cycles of abuse, but with a religious or spiritual component woven in. Parents often use religious doctrine as moral guides for raising children, but some families use them in healthy ways while others use them for coercive control. Excessive physical punishment, guilt tripping, or not allowing a child to question the parent's religion can all fall under the category of religious abuse. Even well-meaning parents can unintentionally perpetrate religious abuse if they believe that's what's best for their children. This is one of the reasons it's so important to make people aware of the harm that can be perpetuated in families with these dynamics. Examples of spiritual abuse towards children by parents include encouraging single-minded thinking in children, creating an us versus them mentality, preventing children from learning about other faiths or disparaging other faiths, forcing children to participate in religious rituals or face punishment for refusal, blaming children for sinful behaviors as opposed to using appropriate disciplinary measures. Justifying use of excessive corporal punishment, not allowing children to question doctrine or not responding to their questions regarding the parent's religion, withholding proper medical care in favor of prayer alone, withholding food in order to make children more spiritual, fasting, not allowing children to express emotion in appropriate ways. Narcissists use religion as a tool to serve them. They are incapable of developing the emotional depth, insight, or empathy required to be a positive and effective leader in a church, family, or romantic relationship. In an intimate partnership, narcissistic spiritual abuse is simply an extension of the narcissist's typical abusive behavior with added spiritual or religious components. When the abuse is not physical or sexual, it can be difficult to classify because emotional, mental, or religious abuse is harder to see. Spiritually abusive romantic relationships often involve the use of religious doctrine in order to justify the abuser's actions or to keep the victim from speaking up or seeking help. To be a church-going member in order to spiritually abuse their partner. If a religious belief system is simply a part of the greater culture or was a part of the partner's upbringing, those circumstances can often supply a narcissist with all the religious material they need to spiritually abuse their spouse. Narcissistic abusers will twist doctrine to suit their needs or pick and choose particular doctrines that enable them to take control in the relationship and simultaneously justify their actions. However, the narcissist will ignore religious beliefs that do not serve them. For example, any religious doctrine that teaches them to put the needs of others above their own or forgive others for slights. In fact, the unwillingness to forgive other people for any perceived wrongs, intentional or otherwise, is a hallmark of narcissistic behavior. A narcissist never forgets what they perceive as mistreatment, whether their perception is correct or not. They will ignore apologies and instead see an apology as acquiescence. This simply gives them grounds to strengthen their own argument. In fact, the narcissist often turns the tables by telling the abused spouse that they are violating religious teachings by not forgiving their continual abuse. Healthy forgiveness does not include the victim volunteering to be harmed again and again. The abusive narcissist is only sorry if they've actually changed their ways, and they won't. The only time a narcissist apologizes is when they are in danger of losing their narcissistic supply. Then they will say whatever they need to say to keep the cycle of abuse going, and perhaps make some token gesture to pretend to show effort, love bombing, and then return to their abusive behavior, using religion to justify it all again. Partners are participants in a spiritual community. The narcissist has the added benefit of using other people to enforce their methods of spiritual manipulation and control, and they will absolutely take advantage of it. If the abused ever wishes to leave the narcissist, the cycle of abuse is even more difficult to break than is typical because there is also added pressure from outside sources. Individuals at church, well-intentioned or not, may pressure the abused to remain in the toxic relationship and forgive the abuser. However, doing so will simply enable the narcissist to continue their spiritually abusive tactics. In fact, the clergy or other church members may tell the abused that it's their duty to accept the abuse and continually return to the perpetrator. Leaders and/or members may pressure you to stay faithful to the marital covenants you've made, regardless of your needs or desire for personal safety. This is very dangerous practice. Many well-meaning church leaders may inadvertently assist the narcissistic abuser in continuing their abuse by encouraging the abused partner to stay in the marriage. Church leaders are often not trained in matters of abuse or domestic violence and do not have the necessary knowledge or tools to effectively counsel a victim or their abuser. Some church leaders do not realize that they are not equipped to deal with such complex mental health issues. They may not refer their clergy members to seek professional help or report domestic violence or child abuse to law enforcement, believing that spirituality is all their parishioners need to recover from trauma. This often creates further dangers for victims of abuse. It's vital to seek professional help for trauma and/or narcissistic abuse recovery. Some signs that a romantic partner might be a spiritual abuser: purporting to believe one religion but not following through on their religious commitments, holding other people to different religious standards than they follow, hypocritical, using religious texts to exert authority over their partner, religious doctrine to bully, guilt, condemn, or shame their spouse into doing what they want, using religious beliefs to dictate all issues relating to parenting, making themselves the ultimate authority or ruler in the home, using religious beliefs to pressure or coerce their partner into unwanted sexual encounters. Sexual abuse can leave emotional and mental scars as well as a changed image of how the abused views God or another higher power. Often, survivors of spiritual abuse who do manage to leave the abusive situation develop an aversion to religion in general. In this way, the narcissistic abuser has robbed them of their connection with their own spirit. The effects of narcissistic spiritual abuse include developing depression, developing complex post traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, developing religious trauma syndrome, RTS, feeling lost without religion, losing your faith, experiencing inability to feel certain emotions, feeling betrayed by God or others, sexual dysfunction, feeling cut off from community. If you are in a spiritually or otherwise abusive relationship, there are professional experts standing by to help you at the National Domestic Violence Hotline. You can reach them anytime at 800-799-7233 or text the word START to 88788. You really do deserve help and support. I'm not an expert in domestic violence as my work is focused on narcissistic abuse and trauma recovery. However, I am a domestic violence and spiritual abuse survivor. I really do understand how hard it is to break these insidious cycles of abuse. If I can aid your trauma recovery in any way, please reach out. Due to my background, I will not judge you or what you've done to survive your abuse. I am simply here to listen, understand, validate, educate, and offer resources to help you create the life you want from this moment forward. Listen, I've been there, and I know that this stuff can be really hard, but there are so many resources to help you through it. If I can help you in any way, please reach out.